Good morning, Dr. Lauren Sampson. Thanks for joining us. Or Samuelson, beg your pardon. How are you this morning?
I'm wonderful, thanks, Joe.
Thank you so much for joining us here at Yellow Shelf. Congratulations on your new book, A Matter of Taste.
Thank you. Thank you. Very glad to see it out in the world.
Yeah, we were just reflecting. It's been a busy few weeks launching a book. So it's good to have you here on Yellow Shelf. What do we need to know firstly about the book? Tell us all about the book.
So, this book actually arose out of my PhD thesis. So, I have spent many, many years researching what eventually happened or what's eventually on the pages of this book. And basically, what it does is it takes readers through sort of some of the history of the way that the Australian Women's Weekly influenced Australian food culture. But it's not just about food, it's also about our our national identity and the way that we sort of interact with each other, the way that we live our lives as well.
Yeah. And look, I probably should point out, the whole link to this, your new book. I grew up in a household where you would open the pantry and you would see a stack of Women's Weekly cookbooks. Many of these books, the barbecue book, the Chinese book, so many of those books that sort of came together as a culinary journey, as you would say. So I totally relate to this. Tell us about your PhD. Tell us about you're a historian. Tell us about that journey, Lauren.
Yeah, so I went to university a long time ago. I won't say how long ago to do my undergrad. I was a history teacher for a little while, so I've always been really, really interested in history. And what I realized was that I don't really like teenagers, so I had to sort of do an about turn on the whole on the whole career path there. So I decided to go back to uni, and I went and did my master's in history, and I actually looked at Australian drinking culture. So, like the 6 o'clock swill and early closing of bars and that sort of thing. And then I thought, I really, really enjoy this. So I'll go back and do my PhD as well, because why not? Um, a bit crazy, I think. And I was sort of deciding what to do. And I thought, well, I've already done drinking. So I'll do, one of the other things that I really love, which is looking at eating. And as I was sort of thinking about, I really wanted to focus on Australian food because I think that in the past, lots of people sort of look at Australian food and are sort of, overly critical of it and tend to think that Australia doesn't really have a food culture. And, yeah, of course, compared to, places like China and Italy and France, we don't have that sort of standardized food culture, but we definitely do have one. And so I wanted to look into sort of how that developed and sort of give look into what nuances were there. And so I decided to look at the Australian Women's Weekly because, like yourself, for me the Women's Weekly cookbooks and those magazines had just always been around. And I used to love sort of sitting in like doctors' waiting rooms or like at the hairdresser, sort of flipping through the pages and looking at the food because it was always, really beautifully photographed. And, we look back at some of those photos now and they look a bit naff. But, for the time, they were really, really cool.
Yeah.
Um, so that's what I decided to look at. And so, I was really, really lucky because the first 49 years of the magazine, while it was still a weekly publication, they're all available for free online using the National Library of Australia's Trove website. So people who are reading my book can go and have a look at some of these recipes that I'm talking about. And I definitely recommend that people
Yeah.
do that and really like have a bit of an explore. So I was really, really lucky in that. Um, so yeah, that's sort of the basis. And it's really hard as a historian of food to sort of look at magazines and cookbooks and go, yes, that's what people ate, because we don't actually know that people were cooking out of these books. Like so many of my cookbooks, I love to sit there and read them and like look through them. Have I cooked all of those recipes? No,
Yeah.
absolutely not. And I'm definitely like, I'm in the majority there, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and so to sort of fill that gap, because like I knew that people were using them, but I really needed to sort of be able to prove that. So I was really lucky that 160 people responded to a survey that I put out about their sort of um, engagement with these books, what they cooked from them, their memories of them. And that really sort of informed a lot of what is in the book as well, is those memories from people, which I think is really lovely.
Yeah, and look, I couldn't not touch on the cake, the birthday cake books. I mean, I'm a mother now, so that book was passed down to me as a mother now, and over the years I've made birthday cakes. It's such a huge part even of my journey. Um, Lauren, tell us about you mentioned you're a history teacher, you've studied your books. What yeah, like what do we need to know about you in any depth? Do you cook, I guess, is probably what I'm curious about.
Yeah, I absolutely do. I love cooking. And as I was sort of doing this research, it was really fun to sort of cook some of these recipes that I sort of came across. The ones that I was really interested in were sort of those sorts of recipes that have fallen out of favor because,
Mm.
fads sort of come and go. Some things stick around, but, most of the time, I'm sort of thinking of, in lockdown, everyone was baking sourdough or like making the Dalgona coffee or whatever. And so these were sort of fads that we sort of, well, I mean, my sourdough starter sadly died a difficult death because once I went back to work, I didn't have
Yeah,
time for
yeah.
so these sorts of fads come and go. And so I wanted to have a look at some of these things that I was really, really not necessarily familiar with. So I
Mm.
would often try to make some of these recipes. And I mean, sometimes it was a bit difficult because we don't have the same sort of ingredients that are readily available and all of that sort of stuff. But it was really fun to sort of cook my way through some
Yeah.
of the recipes for sure.
And I just wanted to touch on part of the book, reflects on the diet culture around these books. Like what do we need to know about that? Because that is ongoing and interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that we can definitely say is that diet culture hasn't really changed that much. And it is sort of very, very linked with sort of celebrity and um, you know, I think that magazines in particular made it very easy for us to fall into the sort of trap of diet culture because we see all of these very glamorous women generally, who are, at this, in the sort of years that I'm talking about, incredibly slender,
Yes.
like incredibly slender. um, and so, in seeing that and then having a look at the diets that went along with those, we sort of see how foods come to be sort of labeled good and bad and how that has sort of informed us over time. And we still have some of these sort of ideas about food being good or bad, but food has no morality. It is just food.
Yeah.
um, and we definitely still see that today. No matter what diet we're talking about, there's
Yeah.
always the good foods and the bad
Yeah.
foods.
Yeah. Well, the book's out now, isn't it, Lauren? You can get it. Where can
It
we connect?
is.
We're curious about the book. We're curious about you. What's the best way to connect? Where can we get the book? On
Yeah, so
Amazon?
on social media, on all platforms, I'm at Clemloz, Clemloz. And if you want a copy of the book, it's available at all good bookstores. If you're traveling, it's at the airport. Feel free to pick up a copy and have a look through. But I really hope that people enjoy it because one of the main things that I wanted to do with my PhD thesis was make sure that people could actually read it because so many of them just get shuffled off to a cupboard to die
Yeah.
somewhere. So
Yeah. Well, look, I'll put all the ways to connect with you and the book in the show notes. I don't have a copy of the book here in front of me because I read it on ebook, but the visual on the front is very nostalgic. Hold it up. You'll see it and it'll resonate with like, yeah, that old nostalgic cooking, embracing
yes,
priority cooking. So I love it. Thank you so much for joining us here.
thank you so much, Joe.
Cheers.